So, Mark, thank you very much for joining this convention. Okay, since the beginning, when we invited you, your feedback was really positive. You you were awesome to accept this invitation. And what to say about Mark Herman? No, Mark Herman, if I'm not wrong, you were born in Brooklyn, New York, and since you have been one, or you are one of the most prolific designers, war game designers, really famous in our hobby. And also, if I'm not wrong, you started with SPI, okay? And you have been always in contact as a strategic planner, doing modelings for the U.S. Army, okay? But
Defense Department of Defense, bigger.
okay, sorry. But I think that better than me, I think that it could be great, okay, if you can give us your opinion about you yourself. How did you start it on this, and differences between what was uh, designing as a wargamer designer in the 70s, 80s, and the difference actually, no? So,
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, I appreciate anybody wanting to come listen to me. I see a few people I know. I see Daniel is here and Eve, and everybody else. Welcome and nice to meet you all. Um, so for me, growing up in Brooklyn, the game of I played chess since I was about 6. So chess, of course, and it was probably the only strategy game I played until 12. So most of my life, early life, was just playing chess, and that was very common in Brooklyn. A lot of people played chess, so it was easy to, kids played chess. Everybody played chess that I knew in my neighborhood. So playing chess was not hard, and and in fact, to tell a personal story. So when I could read. I assume my mother told me how to read because I could read before kindergarten, and I was a little bit of a what do you call it, disciplinary problem in because what they were teaching me I already knew how to do, and I would be a little bit, I was rambunctious, and they would send me to the deputy principal of the school. It's a very big school, PS 225, and he was an old man, I think in the very end of his career, and nobody ever. So I would show up, and he and I used to play chess. So once I knew I could play chess instead of being in class, it became even more of a disciplinary problem until I got older. So I used to play chess as a child with the deputy principal of PS 225 for a number of years, actually, kindergarten, first grade, So, but and then when I came across a game by the Avalon Hill Company called Battle of the Bulge, which is an old.
yeah.
It's a great game, and I played that one to death. And then my friends and and one of the friends I was playing with then, a guy named Gary Gonzalez, and by the way, Spanish descent. Uh, he he and I, in fact, we're still playing games together. I mean, I just turned 70, and he just turned 70. We're still playing games now for over 60 years. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. In fact, posted a picture of Gons. We were at a little convention. We were playing Rebel Fury. I took a picture of him. So yeah, we're still hanging out and doing what we doing since we were like 12 years old. Um, and then the sad thing is, and again, I wrote this book. Everybody is probably aware I wrote this book, and so if you want to know about
Yeah.
all this
Yeah.
career stuff, there's a little section in the front where I go through like the games and my early career, sections of my career. So I'm not going to reprise all that here. But the question you asked me about the difference of gaming, of designing in the 70s and 80s. Um, so I started at SPI September 1st of 1976, and Jim Dunnigan and Redmond Simonson were the co-owners of SPI at the time, and that was in Manhattan on 23rd Street, which is lower midtown. It's almost it's lower midtown, um,
Okay.
right in Norfolk Park Avenue, and right at the foot of Madison Avenue. And Jim had created sort of like I would there was actually enough work that we were all paid. I mean, that's all I did. I was a fully salaried game designer. I mean, it was like my dream come true, and I was designing games. And in the 70s, remember, there's no computers, there's no cell phones. You
Exactly.
know,
Exactly.
there's there's TV and there's movies, and then there's manual games. There's nothing else. And so
Just
that
paper.
world,
Paper. Exactly. Yeah.
all paper. I mean, there were obviously the big, like There were mounted boards, but only for games like Monopoly and the big Risk, which is a French game, as I understand it. So all those kind of things. So, but our games were all paper maps, and they came. And of course, it was Strategy and Tactics magazine was like the core of the company. We put out every I never know how to say, even in English, and I say it's bi-monthly, which would like be twice a month, but it's really alternate months. So 6 times a year, we put out a magazine with a full game in it, and and that schedule was very strict because the contract, you've seen like those big presses for newspapers, or you see the movies like those. We
Yes.
used those for Strategy and Tactics magazine, but because we were so small, we had a very specific moment where our stuff had to be on that machine, or we paid penalties. You'd still get it printed, but it would
Yeah.
cost more.
Yeah.
So we were very strict schedule, and so my beginning of my career was very. The point of all this is that uh, deadlines were very strict because if you weren't on that machine, it would cost money, and so it was like I was taught as a production game designer to be very strict about budgets and time, and everything had to be done. Now we had board games also that we sold off the magazine. They were more flexible, but because of the budget, you couldn't work on them forever. There was an actual budget because your salary got charged like a time card against the budget. So that was sort of the world of the 70s. And I produced like 18 games in like 2 years at that period. I mean, I was working, this was a full time job. And it was a great job, don't get me wrong, but it was a full time job, just like any job. And then I went off and did things with down in Washington, D.C., and I came back into SPI right near where it. So now what has changed is uh, the retail side, so that was the era of direct mail. Like everything we did, you sent your money into SPI, we sent you back a game. We weren't in stores, but then Avalon Hill was much better at being in stores. We tried to get in stores, and that was kind of a disaster for SPI. And they got into trouble. There was a corporate takeover by a company called TSR, which was the owner of Dungeons and
Yeah.
Dragons.
Yeah.
And out of that, the ashes of all that in the early 80s, I created Victory Games you know in collaboration with it's called Monarch Avalon Incorporated, but that they owned Avalon Hill, and Victory Games became another division under a printing company. So we were our own division. We were in Manhattan, and now we're role playing is a much bigger part of the hobby now because Dungeons and Dragons didn't really was only just starting up in the 70s. Now it's a big deal in the 80s. So there was the competition against the traditional historical board games, and also the audience is starting to change. In the 70s, probably, I mean, I would have to say 90% of the market was United States, with the
Yeah.
other 10% being Europe, but it was all in English, so limited, and Japan. Japan was always, Hobby Japan rose in that period. So you had Japanese, you had European, mostly United
Exactly.
Kingdom, and that was the hobby. And then this role playing thing was becoming a bigger deal, and so we started doing. You start seeing role playing games coming in, and we did James Bond out of Victory Games, but we were also doing sort of what I call the end of the classic SPI. Victory Games was really the staff of remember the starting set of Victory Games came from SPI, so we were doing what we always did, but we started branching out and we did some other things. But now, towards the end of the 80s, going to your question, you're starting to get the Atari video game, not video games, but yeah, but they're the console
Yeah.
games. That's the word I'm looking for. The console games are coming in
Yes.
now, not
Yes.
and and that is starting to pull the market in another direction. And but quite frankly, by the end of the '80s, it was a tough time to produce historical war games. The volume. Now, it wasn't that we weren't selling them anymore, but the business model and the cost structure of making games that way, and you didn't yet have the computer production that you have nowadays. So nowadays, you can produce a game as good if you have the skill, if you're a person with the graphic skills on like Adobe Illustrator or one of these big these art programs, which I've never acquired really. Um, you can make games that are as nice, if not better, than anything we ever produce at SPI. You have that ability. And so now, but this is the end of the '80s. That's before that all happens, and so the volume is dropping down. You can't make a living in a board game company using the old business model. And I moved back to Washington, and I stayed there for a quarter of a century, basically, still producing as a freelancer. And then somewhere around the turn of the century, now all of a sudden the computers and the home, now you can produce. And we used to produce when we printed games, we were producing 20,000 print runs, which today would be
It's crazy.
crazy unless you're like a big,
Crazy.
big company
Crazy.
doing like Monopoly or something. But now all of a sudden the cost had dropped so dramatically. You could now put out a game. You could make 1,000 games and sell them, and
Yep.
then the beginning of Kickstarter and GMT P500 and all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of how I see like a big evolution from the '70s. As a designer, I'm designing, but it's the market that you can't work if nobody wants to buy it or you can't sell it. That's the reality of anything.
Yeah.
I hope that
Yeah.
answered your question.
Yeah. No, no, you answered completely, and in fact, it goes really well with. Just to let you know, yesterday evening, we have a nice conversation with all the main Wargaming Spanish publishers. Okay, and that was one of the questions. In fact, it was related to my second question that I was going to ask you. Comparing to that period and all the process that you were saying, how do you see right now this hobby? Okay, and especially, do you think that there is a saturation of war games? So we are publishing more than what the market is demanding, or is the opposite? And the all the you see these guys, more than 30 people here right now, and buying the new war games, course, with a small difference, as you were mentioning. No, before you were arriving to peaks of 20,000. Now maximum using these P500 or things like this, no, or pre-orders, etc. You arrive to 1,000. But do you believe that there is a peak on amount of wargamings, or you still see number of years with the hobby going well?
So you ask a very erudite question, and I'll do my best. This is obviously how I see things. So what has happened broadly? I mean, I'm talking about across all industries, is what I call customized production. In other words, people can make things in very small quantities. It doesn't matter what it is, and still make a profit because of the production costs. The upfront costs. You still have the production costs, but those will come down, and if you can cover the production costs. So one of the reason you see all these huge these very I just got a game like I got this game Dune War for Arrakis, which was done
Yep.
by
Yep.
two very talented Italian designers based off of their War of the Ring design from Ares. So there was, I think, the common, I don't know how they say it in Europe, but CMON produced the Dune game, and it's got these beautiful plastic pieces and sculpts and all that. Back in the '70s, you would have to, it was very difficult to do that because you had to pay the upfront cost of the sculpts and the molds and all of these things to make those, and then you had to sell a lot of them just to break even. With Kickstarter, you get all the money up front. You pay your you can pay for these incredibly talented sculptors, and I mean the stuff is. I mean, I'm not saying it's like Michelangelo kind of stuff, but it's darn good. I mean, it's really, really talented people, and they cover all those costs, one-time non-recurring costs. In business you call that. These one-time costs are covered by the Kickstarter, and once they have the molds, they can make lots of them, but they break even right off the bat. You could not do that in the 70s. That was not possible in that world. And so the point is that you have this ability to have customized development. So, I mean, I see Daniel Hernandez is on this line right now,
Yes,
and I
yes.
don't.
Daniel is
I,
here. Yeah,
seems like a very, he sent me a game. We've talked a few times, but he's focused on the 30 Years War, which is a fascinating period
yeah.
to me also. But he can focus on the 30 Years War, and he can produce games on it, and he can have an audience. But the audience doesn't have to be, it's not like Taylor Swift audiences of billions of people. You just need, as long as you can always find like 1,000 people who want to play your game, you can sell them. And so we are in a what I call more of a bespoke design period. The word, does that come across in Spanish, bespoke? Very
Yes, yes, yes,
customized,
yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes.
very
Yeah.
customized production. And so, in a weird way, the long term health of the hobby is almost assured because we've dropped the production costs down, and now people can get. Now, what I will tell you is, there is no way I will ever. I used to be able to be aware of all the games that were out there, because there was just a certain amount. But now I think there's. I mean, I'm guessing that there's a war game now. I'm not talking about all games because on a daily basis, 5 games get produced on average every day of the year now. Could be even more in the future. So that's a lot of games. Even if nobody can play them all, and I find that a lot of the reviewers that are out there are doing a poorer and poorer job because they don't have time to look at it, really assess it. They just kind of go, it, there used to be a TV show in America when I was a kid called American Bandstand. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but they would have this guy named Dick
No,
Clark,
never here.
very famous, DJ kind of guy. And it was like people dancing on black and white TV, and they were, Michael Jackson used to perform on it, really
Yeah.
big names of that period. And they would get these 2 teenagers, one boy and one girl. They play a new song, and they say, "What do you think?" And the girl would go, "I give it about an 80. I could kind of dance to it." They had these like very light remarks. I find that the reviews now sound like that to me. Yeah, I got the game. I unboxed it. Kind of looks good or doesn't look good. They have no idea what they're even looking at. And so the
Yes,
kind of games that
yes.
I like to design never going to pass that one-time sniff test. You know what I'm saying? So I find that that's probably going to have more of an effect on design than the market because how people can even be aware of all these games is the bigger problem. Not that we can produce them, so I say that one side, the hobby, will continue to benefit from this sort of bespoke, customized design where there's just we're producing a war game a day probably at this point, and
Yep.
nobody's going to buy them all. But as long as you can sell 1,000, you can break even or make a few dollars, and so you can do it again. Okay, great. Uh, and people can have what they want. And that model is sustainable for infinitely, as far as I can tell. You're not stuck with
Okay.
the big. And then every so often, somebody will produce, Twilight Struggle, and sell a lot of them. But it'll happen. But it won't be the normal. The normal will be, these really great games like Daniel's doing on the 30 Years War, and you play it and you really get a lot out of it. But it's not going to be. I doubt Daniel's going to sell 100,000 copies of a 30 Years War game. Nothing personal, Daniel.
Yeah.
I couldn't sell it.
Just to let you know, in regards to Daniel, as soon as we finish this chat, he will give the audience that wants a tutorial on the collapse that you are mentioning. So in another room, he will be there. Yes. So coming back to, sorry. Okay, sorry. Coming back to, yes, I fully agree with you that now the more or less the tendencies, I publish 1,000 copies, and I try that they are sold out as quick as possible. In regards to this, and we go to a specific series that I love, okay, is Great Battles of History, but we can say different series. You are also republishing, no? Do you think that also is this attendance that the, let's say like this, the old war games of the maybe I was going to say 90s, but not only 90s, no, the 20s, but the last 20, 30 years now republishing. So, for example, Pacific War also, but again, Great Battles of History.
Okay, so you broke
Is
up a few
there
times. What
enough
is the
demand?
actual question? I heard what you said, but what is the question?
So the actual question is, do you think that is also demand for these old games that are republishing? Is there enough demand?
Well, so these days, the way I look at my personal success in a game design is, does it stay in print? In other words, For the People just had its 25th anniversary of being in print. My American Civil War game, and so but because of the model we just talked about, you only need because remember, you've done all the graphics are all done, right? The layouts, all the production work is done. So with other than some minor tweaks on some wording or something, if you're not changing anything dramatically, especially when you get to a third and fourth and a fifth printing, you just need 500 people who want the game, and you hit a button and they show up, and so the current model is such that if a game has and let's face it, 25 years. I mean, there are people playing For the People now who weren't born when I did it originally. I mean, not many, maybe, but some. My son is now just turned. What did he turn? I guess he's 34. Oh wow. My son just turned 34, and he was one of my play testers when he was a child on For the People. So the point of it is because it's very demand driven now on reprints. You're guaranteed to sell them because it doesn't get reprinted unless people want it. If people don't want it, you don't reprint it and you're done. You move on. And so I'm very happy to say that Great Battles of History seems to have an enduring legacy. I'm sad that my good friend Richard Berg's not here to enjoy it at this point, but there it is. I have I have a new idea for a new ancient series that will eventually produce. I live long enough, and as a consequence, Empire of the Sun. I don't know that Pacific War will get. I mean, they produced enough of them that Pacific War may not get reprinted, but most of my games run out and they get. Washington's War just got reprinted for like the third or fourth time, and Empire of the Sun just got reprinted for the fourth time. So certain games seem to have over time, there's enough game there that people eventually get exposed to it and say, I want a copy. So that's kind of how it is. So I think these reprints is really more demand driven, not what I want to do. People want it, they'll print them.
Okay. So sorry, because you have said one thing that to me was, I wanted to ask you specifically. So you are saying that the Great Battles of History series is not finished? Maybe are you designing something new?
So that's a complicated question, and it goes down to the death of Richard and how I have to deal with
Yeah.
various things because of his death. So I would say that it's not done. It's just that if you think about the battles that we've done over, it's decades long. This thing we did this thing back in 1990. I don't know that there's many battles worth looking at that we haven't done already. I mean, what's left?
Well, why not the Spanish American battles? No, why not?
Spanish
Period.
American? No, no,
It's
no. But
all
Greg,
South America.
we stopped. We found when we did Line of the North. I think that the system I
Exactly.
designed
Lion
is
of the North.
yeah, but Line of the North, I felt like we had pushed that system, and that's why Berg did the Men of Iron series. Like he felt that it didn't translate well into gunpowder. It was a very good. I designed it remember it was designed around Alexander the Great, and combat has changed enough by gunpowder that the series. I don't feel the series. You're starting to like to. I hate trying to jam a square peg into a round hole,
Yeah.
and so I would I would say that the great battles of history, there are certainly other. Look, there was a lot of warfare going on. You could do. I don't. But we did an Indian Chandragupta. We did the Ron and what was the other one? I forget the other Sika Gahara, whatever we did. No, that's another game. But we did the two James on Japan. We did an Indian game. We did
Run and Samurai, if I'm not wrong, correct?
I know the Battle of Sikigahara is in there, but that's the so you got those two. We did the Mongols. Um, we had all of the Greek, all the Greek battles. I mean, the only volume that I probably will eventually do in the series is I think I'll do a specific Peloponnesian War volume. Just the battle, but there's just but it has to be a combined. It'll be like War Galley plus Hoplite because the battles there's only a couple of land battles. There's only three, really, or four maybe during the Peloponnesian War. So you could get like one good package on the Peloponnesian War, which I eventually will do. But other than that, I can't think of what else I'd do with that series. But I'll start a new series. I have a much more fun series, faster playing. For the time to move on. Anyway, continue.
You were talking about, I think, another person on this hobby that really give us a lot of happiness, no? Richard Berg. Uh, which one was your relation? No, how did you start working together? Please.
Yeah, so when I was 19, which is a very long time ago, uh, I was at
Wow.
the first I was at the first Origins, which was a game convention that was really one of the first big game conventions in America and even in the hobby. I don't think there was anything before that that was nothing beyond like a few people getting together regionally. And I met this guy. There's a game called La Bataille de la Moscova, which is Clash of Arms does it now, but back then it was this guy Larry Groves was the original designer of it. I was 19 and I bought a copy at the convention, which was my whole budget by the way, but it looked so cool. And then he wasn't selling any games, so Larry found me and he said, "Hey, I'm going to set up a game and we're going to start playing. If you want to play." So for the rest of the convention, I played La Bataille de la Moscova with Larry in between when he was going to the hall to sell games, and that was starting to that buzz help. He needed to sell games to pay for his costs back then. So he's selling games, and I'm playing with a couple of guys. And on the last night, like so, this would be like a Saturday night somewhere, let's say midnight plus an hour or two, somewhere around midnight, maybe a little later, like 1 or 2 in the morning. I'm playing this
Mhm.
game, and I'm 19, so I've been up. Sleeping is I didn't need a lot of sleep. Get some food, take a nap for a little bit, come back and play. Right, so I was playing, straight
Yeah.
through, and Richard walks into the room, and that's how I met him. And he says, "What's going on?" And we're both from New York City, so we could understand each other. So we were talking, and we just took a like to each other. And he, and then when I was in back in college, he asked me to come into SPI in the city. I was going to school. I don't know if you know Merritt, but I was east of the city in a place called Long Island at Stony Brook University. I drove into the city and I played his Terrible Swift Sword for him with guns. My friend Gary Gonzalez and I came in and we played Terrible Swift Sword, the Pickett's Charge scenario specifically, and for Richard, and we became friendly. And then I got married, and he and his wife took these newlyweds to a party, and we just all became friends. I mean, it was just sometimes there's chemistry, right? And so the
Yeah.
Hermans and the Bergs became very good friends. I've been good friend. My wife and Karen have been friends for 50 years, and and so we became friends. And then I got a job at SPI, and so I saw him every day. So, and then when I left SPI, he started. I used to still see him. I used to come up to New York and see him and test his games. And he had a company called for a short while called Simulations Design Incorporated. Did a few games. And he asked me to do a game for him, and I did this Alexander the Great game, the beginning of the Great Battles of History series. And at that time, the company was kind of faltering, and he sold me to GMT Games to do Alexander. So it started out working for
Okay.
Richard, and I ended up doing it for Gene Billingsley and GMT Games, and that's how I've been at GMT since then.
Okay, okay, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, moving to periods.
One
No,
last thing.
you were saying that.
One last thing. I apologize. And you should all know, Richard did a series, a really great set of games called, I guess it was called Rome, Republic of Rome, and Carthage. And there was a good, and Thunderbolt was the third one. And Richard loved making maps. And so after he passed away, I found out through Mark Simonich that he had done the maps for Spain, speaking of Spain, for that period.
Okay,
And when I heard that, and so I was able to get Alan Ray, his longtime developer, and I was sort of the impetus, but he did all the work. Really, all the work was done by Alan for the most part. And so Thunderbolt is me getting his last design published after his death. So that's going to be out soon. It's going into art. I think it's either just gone into art or it's going into art in January, but it's done. And so we'll have
okay.
Richard will ride. Richard will ride one more time, before he rides off into
Yes,
the sunset.
we are waiting honestly with, in order to play. So, Mark, my question was going to be: we're talking about also designs, periods. Which one would you say that is, because you have designed, I would say, all the periods of the history. No? So which one is your preferred period? I would say,
You know,
if there is any.
so I think I have two. I'm a historian before a designer, and my degree from university was in 5th century BC Greece. So that's why I've done so many games on you know history, and obviously when you get a degree like that, you also take stuff on Rome, and so ancients was my original knowledge base, and I grew up around, and because of when I was in 1960, I was 61. I was like 5 years old, and when you're 5 years old, I could read, and that was the first centennial of the American Civil War. So the American Civil War was my original introduction into military history, and so I'm pretty deeply knowledgeable about the American Civil War, and I'm very knowledgeable about the 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 Greek, Athens, Sparta period of Greece, 5th century BC, Aegean history. And then I've acquired, just because of interest, I've acquired a lot of knowledge around World War II in the Pacific. I know a lot of other things. Wars of America is an area of expertise. I'm very knowledgeable, and you know, the American Civil War being one of them, and ancient Greece. So those are my real interest periods. Other things that I've gone into, I have to do a lot of research because I don't, there's a lot of history to know, right? There's more history to know than any
Yep.
one person could know. But I would say my three levels of expertise, really deep expertise, is like 5th century BC Aegean history, the American Civil War, and the American Revolution, and World War II in the Pacific. I know a lot of things in between, but I can hold my own with, in a. I was almost going to get my. I was going to go into a PhD program, and it would have been the dissertation would have been around the American Civil War. So, that's kind of where I would have ended up, that way.
Okay. And you were mentioning your, of course, deep background, but also you have collaborated, as we're mentioning at the beginning, with a lot of organizations, no defense, etc. Um, do you think, Ocha, could you please explain to us if there is any relation between wargaming and this sort of collaboration, okay, with these organizations?
Which organization are you referring to, Shima?
Well, for example, if I'm not wrong, you collaborate with the Pentagon, correct? Or I'm wrong?
Worked for the Pentagon.
Sorry?
I worked for the Pentagon.
With the Okay, so the question is, do you think that did you take benefit on that in order to develop war games or not? Could you say that there is a link between this type of collaboration or not?
Let me put it this way. I won't go into that in any detail, but the Pentagon didn't hire me because of my good looks. They hired me because I was a war game designer. Yes, there's a
Okay,
definitely.
okay. Okay.
linkage. No, I had no
Okay.
other skill.
Excellent.
There was no I would have valued other than that.
Okay. Okay. Then let's leave as it is. Um, let's move to okay. Another important question I would like to ask you is you design Pacific, but later on you design something that we don't know how do you did, but you combine art-driven games with hexagons. There were similarities, totally differences. How you arrived to design Empire of the Sun, and if there was any relation with Pacific War, and it was completely something.
No, there is a definite relationship between the two. No question about it. Um, so there are three things that carried over in my mind. The first thing is the research. I mean, remember, I was running Victory Games in 1985. Well, obviously before that, and so I remember I was designing Pacific War in 1984, right? Because you got to do it before it publishes it. So in 1984, and I am a full time. I mean, I'm running a company, but I'm a full time game designer, and so
Yep.
and so I am deeply researching. I went up to the Library of Congress, which is the library of all books in America. And and then we have the New York. There's an amazing library called the 42nd Street Library that has all sorts of detailed things. I had special access to the rare books division there when I was at Victory Games, so I could see I was really researching the heck out of it. I have notebooks and notebooks. Remember, early computers. I'm using a pencil and a piece of paper to write this all down, right? Typewriter. This is old stuff. And so I absorbed an enormous personal knowledge around the Pacific War, orders of battle, ships and plane types and technology, and most importantly, there's a British historian named Ronald Lewin. I don't know if you know who Ronald Lewin is, but he wrote in the late 70s, early 80s, it finally broke into the public domain about all of the code breaking, that happened. Became information, and I
Okay.
got to meet Ronald Lewin, and he gave me a manuscript of his book. Sadly, he was terminally ill at the time, but I did have dinner with him once, and he was a fascinating man. And he gave me a copy of his manuscript. No, he gave me a copy of the Midway chapter from his manuscript. And so I really got this appreciation, which is going to go into the second part of the three parts, of the impact of information on the war. And so the Pacific War design had baked right into it from at the core level of the game, relative information advantage was a key part of Pacific War, right? That's the surprise attacks and the intercepts, and the whole system is based around this meeting with Ronald Lewin and my understanding now of how code breaking affected planning and all that kind of stuff. And 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 so that piece of it carried into Empire of the Sun, definitely. That was a big piece of what carried there. And then the third part was uh, I had found in the Library of Congress a map, a very unique map that was done in 1942 by an Army engineering magazine, which was they took. Remember, you have to, for all those who are unclear on this point, the world is a sphere, right? It's a globe, and it's not flat. And so when you look at so I've become very adept over the years in map projections. There's different kind of map projections and how to read maps. I'm very good at reading maps, and I learned how to read maps in school because I was into marine biology. I mean, I actually have taken cartography, so I understand maps very well. There's different projections, and everybody's used to looking at Mercator projections, which take a globe and they peel it up in a weird way. And so if you look carefully on a Mercator projection, the scale of the map changes as you get towards the poles, right? The scale changes, which in a game is incredibly annoying. So I found an equal. So this was a mathematical taking the sphere and peeling it back correctly, and it's equal area. So the scale in this map was the same no matter where you were on the map. And that's why Pacific War and Empire of the Sun had this weird look to them, because you're taking like an orange and you're peeling back peeling it back and flattening it out. And there's a little bit of distortion, but it's not that bad. And so that carried over. So those three elements carried over. Now, the CDG part was, based on I liked the idea of using cards as an enhancement to hiding information. Again, the war being very much around information advantage, and then you get Empire of the Sun, and again, of all my designs, it's tied for first with my favorite. So it's one, and I still play. In fact, I have it's always set up here. I have a game going on downstairs right now.
Okay, okay. Coming back to another series, American Civil War, okay, and clearly,
You're breaking up, Chibo. I didn't catch any of that. I'm sorry.
Successfully,
You'll have to start from scratch because you kind of froze.
and oops, I don't know. It was, I don't know if it was me. Let me ask you again the question. So I was asking you about the Civil War. No, Rebel Fury, clearly it has been really a success. The question clearly is, are you planning to recreate all the main relevant battles of the Civil War?
Yes. I mean, I can be more specific.
I don't know.
So I heard your
Yep.
question. I got your. Yeah, I got the question. You're whatever. We're having difficulties with the internet, whatever. So the answer is yes. The short answer is yes. I'm going to do every battle of the American Civil War. That's the short answer. Uh, the so there are a lot of games on the American Civil War out there. You've got there's one level you have all the tactical games. Where you put your artillery and you shoot it. 5, 6, 7, 8 hexes at the other guy, and rifles shoot multiple hexes. And there's a lot of great games that I play. Terrible Swiss Sword being like one of the first ones of that kind of game, right? But there's a lot of tactical Civil War games out there. Then you have at the other end you got For the People and U.S. Civil War by Mark Simonich, and you've got there's a whole bunch of games at the strategic level. At the operational level, I think the market these days is dominated by the great battles of the American Civil War. Dominates the operational level, but Rebel Fury is specifically the grand tactical level of the Civil War. I want to be clear about that. And a guy named Baron Jomini, who fought with Napoleon, defined the grand tactical level as maneuver combinations prior to and during a battle. That's what the definition of the grand tactical level is to me, and that was what my doctoral dissertation was going to be about, by the way. So the Rebel Fury is a grand tactical game of the American Civil War, specifically different than a tactical game and specifically different than an operational game. So I want to be very clear about that. And so it has it's just different than the other ones because it's very focused on its scale, which I don't always do, but this time I'm very specific about the scale, and the decisions are your General Grant or General Lee. You're not the corps commanders, you're not the regimental commanders, and you're not, or President Lincoln in the case of For the People. And so the next in the series, Army of the Potomac, which is set up downstairs in my studio, covers two big campaigns of the Army of the Potomac. General Grant's 1864 Overland Campaign, which starts at the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, North Anna, Cold Harbor. That is the coverage of that part of the Army of the Potomac. And it covers the 7 days battle under General McClellan, which is, it's Seven Pines and Fair Oaks and ending in Malvern Hill. That whole battles around water. So that's what's in that particular package. and the third volume is going to go west. And the title of it
Wow.
is "The Iron Dice of Battle" is the title of the third volume, and that is an actual quote by a Confederate general named Albert Sidney Johnson, and that'll have Shiloh and a lot of the Vicksburg stuff and a few other games, and I probably will put one Eastern battle in there. I'm still might be Bull Run, I'm not sure, but I also the other thing I'm trying to do is the series, the core. One of the things that has personally annoyed me. Okay, this is going back to the old blue and gray days, is they would say, "Oh, look, it's a series game and it's got 4 pages of rules." Oh, that's very nice. Yeah, that's good. And then you see the scenario rules are 8 pages of rules, and I could never. It always drove me crazy. So Rebel Fury, the core rules are not going to change. I thought through all of the war before I did it.
Okay.
Now the scenario rules you'll see are like how much ammunition do you get, who goes first, that kind of stuff you got to tell people in the setup. But there's not going to be, and there might be one or two opening condition rules, but it's not going to be like a rule booklet to play the scenario. It's all in the core. And if you know how to play Rebel Fury, you could literally play Army of the Potomac Battle, not out of the box, without even looking at the rules, if you know them. However, I am going to have campaign rules for the 1864 campaign. So there'll be an overlay which is more operational, and at that point, I do whatever I want. But the core rules, if you just want to play Spotsylvania Courthouse or you want to play North Anna, set it up and play. No rules changes. It'll just be the thing that links the battles together. That will be, and I'm going to try to do that where I can because it's geography based, right? I can't, it's a half mile per hex, and so I think you've seen pictures of it. It's like 12 feet long, and so
Yes. Yes.
and
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know that there's many other situations of the Civil War. There's a few places like in the Eastern Theater because it's a smaller theater, but in the West, not as easy to do. It's just too much space. But but again, each battle will be its own map, its own counters. I also did it. I also want to give a lot of value. There's a lot of games out there, so everybody does a game that do one battle. You're always going to get like six battles per box kind of thing. So it's not a quad game. How do you say that? I don't know how you say six. Maybe there's a way to say it in Spanish. We'll call it that. 6 game box. It's not a quad, that's for sure. I'll have to look it up. So anyway,
Yeah.
that is my plan for the American Civil War series. I guess they call it the Civil War Heritage series.
Cool. Okay. Question about designers. As you have seen here, we have a lot of designers in the room. We have Yves, we have Daniel, we have other people. Um, when you design, okay, which one are the parts of the whole process, let's say like this, that you enjoy more, you enjoy less? Which one are I prefer to start on this? How is the process? You would say, uh, in the design, the whole designing process of a war game.
Huh. So here's the good news. Chapter 4 of my book lays this out in great detail. So,
Okay.
and I'm not. I think the book's almost all sold out anyway, so
That's
it
the
doesn't matter.
reason I was.
Yeah. So there's a chapter. It's called Nuts and Bolts. So let me start with what I like the least. I hate arts and crafts. I hate. So one of the things I loved about working with Richard Berg and Jeff Engelstein is they're much better. Like Richard loved making maps. So if we were doing a game, he'd do the map, and I didn't have to deal with it. Now I can make maps. I've made a lot of maps, but it's not my love. I like looking at maps and I like figuring it out, but then I like giving, like with the American Civil War games, what I finally did was I gave Charlie, the artist, here's the base map and at the right scale, and here's the orientation, and he just puts it right into the computer, and I don't have to sit there and trace maps anymore. And and so that's a much better process for me. I hate making counters. You remember something when I was in SPI, I used to create blind test copies for the next war. It had 2,400 counters, two-sided. I had to write that by hand. That is insanity. I mean, you know how many hours that takes? It takes forever. And, I hate that. So there's a company called Blue Panther Games. I think you guys have heard of them before.
Yeah.
I I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
sent them. I sent them the PDFs that Charlie makes, and they're going to print counters and give them to me. And I pay, yeah, it's $10 a counter sheet. Great. So I'm using modern technology. So the thing I hate to do the most, arts and crafts. I'm I'm moving that into other people that I don't need to do that. It's a better use of my time. Now, what do I like doing most?
Okay.
I love reading history, and so I don't have a copy in here, but so for the Civil War. So there's a lot of people online. They go, "What books did you read?" And all this kind of stuff. So let me help you out. So the American Civil War series, and people go, there's newer stuff out there. So in 1862, Congress during the Civil War passed a legislation that Lincoln signed. They were going to collect all the records, and there's something called the Official Records of the Rebellion. It's 128 volumes, and it was produced between 1866 and 1915 or so. That's how long it took to produce this thing. It's a mess organizationally, but it's all the original reports and correspondence of everybody from the war that they got. And they got a lot of, not all of it, certainly the Confederate side, but they got most of it. And so when I do my research, I'm reading that, and so I love that. And I just finished reading, like for Army of the Potomac, General Grant, when he was Lieutenant General, he wrote a 50-page report to the American Secretary of War, which was Edward Stanton, on from the day he took over command of the armies, everything he did for the rest of the war. So when people say, "Well, that's not right," I go, "Well, General Grant disagrees with you." That this is how I look at research. I like to read the original stuff as much as possible. And I've read hundreds of books on the American Civil War, and I made a comment once that I haven't been learning anything new from the more recent books, and people freak the hell out online. And the answer is, it's not that the book is bad. You see, they're saying, "Oh, you're throwing shade on the book." No, I'm telling you that book. I read that book. Here's another book that I read that says the same stuff that this book said, but I read it 20 years ago. So the problem is the people have a shorter horizon than I. I'm just old, and I've read a lot of books. And so when I say I am not learning something new, doesn't mean you can't learn something new. It's just we have different bases of knowledge. And so people are very defensive these days if you say anything that they don't like, but that's what I'm saying. So the part I like the most is the research and the prototyping. And I do
Okay.
my own
Okay.
development up to a point. I get the game. I don't believe, by the way, this is something you asked me earlier, but I'll answer it. I don't, because of my SPI training, I don't believe I've designed a game until I have a full set of rules. Unless there's a full set of rules,
Yeah.
there's no game. And it could be in my head. I could play with people. I could have charts. But if I don't have a full set of rules that I could hand to you and walk away, I don't have a game. That's my view. And a lot of people don't
Yeah.
have that discipline these days, I think, because I see some of the rules. I go,
Yeah. Okay. So you were mentioning, sorry, Mark?
good.
No, no. You were mentioning before that you are starting playing chess. Um, I have especially read you that one of the options now is to play the war games with the clock and as you play the quick matches on chess. Do you think that the way to play a war game with this type of pressure or without changes a lot? And also the other question is any other synergy that you could see between chess and war game?
Well, let's okay. That last is an interesting question, and I wrote about this in the book. There's a chapter on this. So,
We must buy the book.
but I did write all this stuff down now. So I won't be here forever, and at least my grandchildren will know what I was thinking about. But um, so the question ultimately is, so chess and Go and Sente, all the ancient strategy games are alternating play. I make a move with one piece, you make a move with one piece. This alternating play of chess, right? Same thing with Go. I place one stone, you place a stone, back and forth. Uh, then a guy named Charles S. Roberts, who we named the award after, created, Tactics and Tactics 2 and Gettysburg from the Avalon Hill, the origins of the Avalon Hill. And his thing was you can move all, some, or none of your pieces, right? So I had a turn where I could move all. And what was happening, I believe, again, I've spoken to Charlie Roberts twice in my life. He was older and he was a bit cranky, but cool guy. But in chess, to create a combination, it has to build over time, and because of that, games tend to be a lot of draws because I see you coming and I block it. It's that kind of situation. There are parts of real military history that work that way, because it's more simultaneous, right? And that I move, you move thing tends to be more interactive. It tends to be closer to a simultaneous because I don't get to do a million things that you don't get to see and all that kind of stuff. However, the Charles Roberts method, which is a lot of war games, allows you to create all these cool combinations like that. I get to move my tanks and my planes and everything just kind of. And so, what I feel I've gotten from chess is this back and forth piece is actually in some ways, in my mind, a better method. But when I did the card driven games, I could create campaign cards. So the few times in history when people coordinated either by accident or on purpose, you could create that in the game when you needed to, but it wouldn't have to be every single turn. You see, so there was sort of the blend, and that's really why I think Empire of the Sun and For the People have worked so well because they capture that you're doing something, I'm doing something, but every so often I get to do something extraordinary, but I don't get to do something extraordinary all the time. Extraordinary tends to be the edge case, not the main case in history.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, we have mentioned a couple of times, Mark, clearly a question. Your book, okay? I think it has been a success, okay? A lot of interesting chapters.
The book is a success. It got published. That's
Well,
good.
but the question clearly is, well, first of all, how we can buy in Spain, if you know, okay, physically, not but is there any option that we buy through Amazon in Spain, or we need to order no matter what in GMT's website? You
It's
know,
yeah,
or potentially we could work? Yep.
it's only through the GT website. I think they have, you know. So remember, this is we published 2,200 books. I'm just telling you how many books we printed. Very nicely printed, and
Okay.
1,700 of them just shipped. So that leaves 500 books.
Wow.
So
Okay.
now after those 500 books go, which I don't think is going to be 10 years, uh, it might go for reprint. Who knows? Or they won't sell them out and nobody wants to read it, and that's the end of it. Who knows? But if it sells out, and like any P500, they'll put it back up on the P500, and if there's interest, and then over time, so the only way to get it right now is through GMT. And I said this after they're closing, as soon as they ship the 1,700, they're closing the warehouse for the rest of the year for Christmas. And then, so if you want to buy it, you're going to have to order it. I don't know what I know shipping cost to Spain.
Exactly. That is the problem. Yeah, that is the problem. I was going to ask you because at least I have not seen that. Is there any option to buy a digital version, or you don't plan to, I don't know, even in P500 to have the option of a digital version of the book?
Someday, I'm not going to do the digital version until the physical, like nobody wants a physical book anymore. It's, well,
Okay.
I want it, you know, if you once you go digital, it's nobody will ever buy nobody will ever buy a physical book again. And I'd like to get more than 2,200 books out into the world if possible. But that's my plan is we're going to go physical books for the near future, and then someday it'll be digital. I've even talked to my daughter about doing a ebook version where she'll read it, and but that's down the road. Or maybe I'll get all the kids to read it. I don't know. So, but uh, but regardless, the that's my plan. So if you want to get a copy of the book, but however, if anybody see, I'm going to be my plan is I'm going to a number of conventions. I like I said, I turned 70. I'm in, thank God, in good health. But this year I'm going to plan a lot of trips to Europe. So I'm going to be in, I believe I will be in Prague, Vienna. I'm trying to go to Essen. I'm going to go to Rome, and I'm going to go to Liros. And yeah, and I'd like to get. I really want to go to Spain. If I get to, I don't. It just depends on the timing.
Exactly.
You know, like once I'm in Europe, it's not inexpensive to be running around Europe, as you know. And so when the conventions are close to each other, like where I could be at one and then a few days with my wife, and she goes home and I go to another convention, that could work out. So I'm trying to. I'm going to go to Europe in the spring and in the fall, and in the summer I'll be in the United States. So I'm going to try
Yeah.
to figure out how many conventions like places I could be, um, but I can't be in Europe for a month, so I just couldn't afford it. So it'll have to be
Okay.
like 10-day segments where I could hit two places. That's what I'm trying to do.
It was going to be the last question, but now the audience know. As you plan to go to Essen, if I'm not wrong, it would be great, and it will be a pleasure. Honestly, it will be a pleasure if you can join the convention in Cádiz, Pax Ludica. I think is the nearest physical convention in Spain around the dates that you will be in Germany. Otherwise, as we have been discussing, we'll be in contact, Mark, and we will try that physically we can meet you in a physical convention in Spain. Okay,
That'd be great.
that could be great.
But if I don't do it this year, I will definitely do it next year. One of my goals is I really, I've been, the only place I've been to in Spain, which you could argue is Barcelona. I spent a bunch of days. I've been in Barcelona extensively once in my life. Otherwise, I was in Madrid for about an hour to get to Barcelona in the airport, and that's it. So I would really like to go to Spain and see Madrid, and Spain's a beautiful place. I want to go around, and so if there's a game convention, I will try to, that would be the rationale to get there. So yeah, I will get to Spain, but it may not be in 20. But if I'm still alive, 2026, I'll go for.
So we will be in contact. Of course, I recommend the whole Spain. I'm not going to say any place better than the other, but for sure, there is no other place to eat a better paella than in Valencia. That is important, you know. The paella is from Valencia.
Then I will have to
Yeah,
come to Valencia for sure. And that's on the east coast on the Mediterranean, yes?
exactly, East Coast. So
Yeah, yeah. So I
really
definitely want to
easy
go to
to
Valencia.
reach. Deal done, deal
Good.
done. So, and no, coming back to one important question, Mark, and that is the reason, and you see here 40 people all time. One important question I wanted to ask you, and is the relation, not the physical conventions. We're talking about it's clear important this type of conventions, no online conventions, people like you that you can join. We can have a conversation with you, but also it's important. On Thursday we had Jean, okay, from GMT in our chat, and he was saying that one of the most important thing on this hobby is the people that you find on this hobby. No, uh, most of the people that we have here behind, I can really say it right now that they are my friends. And I would like to ask you about the physical conventions. What do you think about this? Which one are the main aspects? Clearly in the US, that is the ones that you go maybe yearly, couple of times. Please, things that are important for you in a physical convention.
So I'm going to Essen only. I think you guys know Uli Blenneman. He's well known member in the hobby, old friend of mine. And I've been to Essen. I took Richard to Essen once a long time ago. Um, I took Richard to Essen uh, with me. I was able to get a business trip, and I just got a bigger room, and I just took him. so he could go. And so we were there, and I've only been to Essen once, and it was incredibly large and crowded and loud, and I wanted to see it. And the only reason I'm going back to Essen again is a bunch of my friends here who are gamer friends of mine, and they don't play war games as much as we play, like like Nemesis, and we played a bunch of games and Arkham Horror or whatever it is. But they want to go to Essen, so I said, sure, I'll go. So that's why I'm going back to Essen. But I don't. Essen is a kind of convention I don't like. Too big. It's too noisy. More about selling games and playing games. My favorite conventions are the ones that are held by Harold Buchanan and SD Hiscon. They're less than 200 people. There's tables. People are playing games. They're talking to each other. It's a nice atmosphere. There's good food nearby. Um, so I like the one in Newport, which is very small, and would be very difficult for anybody because it's on a U.S. military base. So getting permission to go is hard for if you're not an American citizen. But the one in San Diego is fantastic, but that's pretty far from Spain. But the San Diego one, I
Yeah,
just came back
yeah.
from November, one of my favorite conventions. Uh, the other one is there's GMT East and West. I don't usually go to West because it's too close to the San Diego one, and believe it or not, California is a very big place. So San Diego to Northern California is like 6 hour, 7 hour car ride or plane. So it's not that simple. But I like, but GMT East is in New York, which is not too far away. So I go to that one. And although I might miss it this year because I go to Rome, they're doing a Churchill is coming out in Italian. So they're March 27th. I'll be in Rome for a convention, and who doesn't want to go to Rome, right? My wife's Italian, so getting here to go to Rome is not that difficult.
Okay, where is she from?
Um, so her family is from a place. It's close to Salerno. Is the actual town is called
Okay,
Post.
okay.
The actual town is called Postiglione, but it's east of Salerno. It's inland
Stignano.
from.
So Campania. Is
Yeah,
from
exactly.
Campania.
Yeah. But it's a
Okay,
small place
okay,
east of Salerno.
okay. Nice place, nice place. Well,
And my friend Gary Gonzalez
um,
is from Madrid, by the way.
okay. So we're talking about physical conventions, and also we were discussing about people. No, we have spoken a little bit about Richard Berg. I think that also in some interviews, no, Jean has influenced you. Who would you say that the people in this hobby that influence more during all this year? Who?
You influence me more than anybody else.
Sorry, can you repeat it? Maybe it's my yeah.
I'm not sure why I
I
understand the question.
Okay, I repeat the question. No, my question was who influenced in this hobby more to you? Which one have been
Yeah,
the
that's
people that during all these years have influenced? But let me apologize that my
no, I
sound
understand.
maybe is not so good. Yeah. Okay.
Easy answer. Jim Dunnigan and Redmond Simonson. More than
Okay.
anybody else.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
More than anybody else. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. So
Well,
moving to oops.
Jim. I see Jim regularly still. Jim and I are still close. And I had lunch with him 6 weeks ago. I see him. I had lunch with him about 3 or 4
Okay.
times a year. He's doing fine.
Okay. Okay.
By
Cool.
the way, I will tell you
Um.
question to you. This is from Jim Dunnigan verbatim. So somebody wanted to do an interview with Jim, and Jim doesn't really do interviews anymore. And so I said to this guy, when Jim said no, I said, "Well, tell you what, you're a nice guy. Ask what if you had one question to ask Jim Dunnigan, what would it be?" And he said, "Ask him, um, how do you know the right balance between history and playability?" That was the question that he wanted me to ask. So I asked Jim that question, and Jim's answer, as always, was very very excellent. He said, "Keep it simple, keep it simple smartly." So that comes directly from Jim
Okay.
Dunnigan. If you're designing games, Jim feels that sort of sums it all up, and it's a pretty good quote.
Okay. Okay. And one, my opinion, we are arriving to. Sorry, Mark.
What?
Okay. So one question I wanted to ask you: Spanish community, no, the Spanish wargaming community, from your side, okay? Comparing a couple of years ago to the reality that we have right now, which one is your feeling about the Spanish community? Is increasing? Is stable? Is growing? Which one is your opinion?
So let's be clear. I don't have. First off, I I have to say that my recent interactions with the Spanish wargaming community have all been incredibly positive, and that's one of my what's creating the desire for me to come to these conventions you guys are holding in Spain. So I will get there. I am very excited about what you guys are doing, and I'd like to meet everybody and talk, and it'd be great. Hopefully, I can improve my Spanish a little bit so I don't have to just be in English. But 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 I don't have a good. I don't have a other than the what's his name? Dio Dorca. Uh,
Yes, from the beer,
yeah,
correct?
those guys are incredibly
Kim Dorca
nice.
is, in fact, is Kim Dorca. Is Joaquin, as me. He is called Joaquin Dorca, Kim Dorca.
Yeah, so I've talked to him a few times online, and I'm very excited about obviously he and I'm very excited about what he's doing only because I know more about it. So I'm very excited. I hope it would if you the most important thing is if you guys you seem like to be more of a community than I've seen in a long time, so that's a good thing. And so I'm looking forward to joining you all physically sometime in the near future so we can all talk. But beyond that, it seems like everything's going great in Spain as far as I can tell. So it sounds great.
That's really cool. Um, okay, so let's give a little bit some options, okay, to the audience to ask you questions, if you are okay, Mark.
Sure, sure. I'm good.
Okay, please, anybody who wants to ask anything to Mark, please raise your hand, and I will move to the scenario. Any question there? Eduardo, you want? Yeah, Eduardo, come here. Okay.
Hello.
Hi,
Okay.
Eduardo.
Hi, Eduardo. So,
Sorry,
Mark,
let
just to
me.
introduce you, Eduardo Molins. Sorry, Eduardo, just one question, 1 second. Eduardo is one of the main podcasters in Spain. He has a program called Playing with Grandpappy, I could say, Eduardo, or how we can translate.
With grandpas, with grandpas.
With Grandpa. Okay, with Grandpas.
That's awesome.
Okay,
And for
please, Eduardo.
sure, I don't know if called you Mark or Mr. Herman
Oh, absolutely, Mark. Don't call me anything but Mark.
because in our programs usually we said we have only a couple of shrines or altars. One is for Volkerunke and one is for you. so so I'm very happy. So I'm very happy to can salute you and give my all my respect in for all the big games and the lots and lots of hours I've played. For sure, my preferred one is Pacific War. I played Pacific War lots of hours when I was young. Yeah, that one of the victory games. No, that's the new one. That's the new one. The good one is the old fashioned, the old fashioned one. Yeah, and and I want to make you a question because my impression with all your career designing games is that you have, well, you make Pacific War, you simplify it a little bit with Empire of the Sun. You
Hopefully, a
made,
lot.
yeah, a little bit is a way to say it, and well, you take, well, you made games of American Civil War, not the Civil War. Sorry, I'm merging in my mind all the things of Victory Games because I link your name with Victory Games. Of course, you were the CIO, so well, but then you make a very lighter version of games like Gettysburg and the last games you made. So uh, in all these years, your your trend is to simplify games, um, uh, as um, as long as we are aging and having lots of years of experience. You prefer to make more simplified systems, or in your mind you want to make another, well, monster game, or more complex game like War, Pacific War.
So, first of all, it's a very clever question, and I will answer it in this way. Uh, believe it or not, I was just looking at something that Albert Einstein, with the general theory of relativity and time is really where I'm going with this. And I believe that we all have 3 hours to play a game.
Yeah,
I mean, 3 hours is you have lunch, you sit down, you play a game, and before dinner you're done. This is people people have children, they have grandchildren, they have spouses, and there's only so much time in the day, and we all work, and so all of my games, even looking at Pacific War, that's why it has lots and lots of scenarios that and I learned this from the Japanese, actually. The Japanese, early in my career, I was dealing with the Japanese designers, and their homes, they change a room. They don't have a lot of space, and they like a room could be where they eat, and then they put the table away, they put the bed out, they sleep in it. They transform the room based on time of day, and so they can't have a table up with a game up beyond a few hours. And so I learned that a long time ago. So all of my games, starting with Pacific War and all of them, you can play a scenario in under 3 hours. So in in Pericles, there's the Archidamian War, and in For the People is the 1863 scenario, and Pacific War has multiple battles that play in Coral Sea and whatever play in 3 hours. And Empire of the Sun has the 1863 scenario in South Pacific. So you can always play one of my games in 3 hours. Now, with that in mind, if you want to have a bigger topic, like a bigger battle or something, if it's very intricate, you're not going to be able to play it in 3 hours. A battle can't be played in 3 hours if it's very intricate. And I also feel that from a value point of view, with so many games being produced, I feel that a lot of games, when I do a very complicated game, sometimes I feel it's more admired than played, and I would prefer that it be played. And so there is this balance of you're going to look. I mean, there's like a game done created a day. If you're going to buy one of my games, why would you buy it if you can't actually get it on the table? You don't have time, or you can only admire so many things. And so it's not that I'm trying, although I do believe in simplification at times, there is, like Dunnigan said, keep it simple smartly. And so using that as a sort of a theme, Rebel Fury is a very sophisticated strategy game, but doesn't have complicated mechanics. It's got, so trying to become more streamlined in the mechanics doesn't make it a less intricate game. It just makes it less intricate mechanically. It can be very intricate strategically. And that's what I'm going for. I would like to keep the mechanics less intricate, but get you a lot of thinking, strategy, options, player agency, whatever narrative into a more streamlined format, and that takes more skill than less skill. It's what there was a famous American writer called Mark Twain, and his famous line is, I apologize for my long letter. I didn't have time to write you a shorter one. And so sometimes I'm trying to take the time to write the shorter letter now at this point in my life. So people will play the game. And I will tell you, I've been now to 5 conventions since Rebel Fury came out. And at every convention now, I see my games being played because they can go to a convention, set it up, play it, finish it, and go do something else. And I like that.
Thank you very much, Chimo. I leave the stage, but only the last thing. Uh, I'm I agree with you 100%, Mark. But only for the record, the only thing I played with Pacific War is a couple of campaigns.
Yeah, and yes, one,
I
thank you.
was
Well,
young and I have time.
see, that's the thing. I you design when I was, the Gons and Gary Gonzalez and I, we played, SPI had this game called Wellington's Victory, which was a big, the Battle of Waterloo game with, battalions and all this. And we set it up on my mother's dining room table and we played, all the, after school, we played on weekends. And then every so while, and then remember, this is going over like weeks and weeks and weeks. And my mother would come in and goes, look, I'm having a dinner party in 1 week. Game's got to be gone from my table. So yes, we were all young ones, but that's not so much the case anymore.
Okay, thank you very much, and bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Eduardo. Thanks. Mark,
That's great.
another question from somebody that I think that you know. Daniel, come to the stage.
Okay, just turning on. Okay, good afternoon. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Daniel.
You listen me correctly? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. First, thank for you. I mean, for your kind words. I mean, I really appreciate it, and that's a true example for me. To Chimo, everyone is jealous of you, so you have to be happy. And I'm gonna be concrete. So, I mean, I want just people to go around. But I wanted to ask you, since you published one game, the first edition, since probably the 5, the 6, or whatever count edition, there has been any changes that you have think, oh, my first game is a bit different from now? Maybe from the playtest, maybe when you go to conventions and you see people playing different, so you adjust some things. So it's because a game is never finished, even if it's published, it can go only live.
So let's talk about. So there's 2 things that caused me to make a change in editions. There's 3 things. Well, first off, sometimes, like when I did Empire of the Sun in 2005, the artist Mark Simonich chose a certain color palette. Now there was a rule about who's in the Army and who's in the Navy, and the way we chose the colors, it was confusing. You had to remember that these kind of units are in the Army, even though they're blue, and you had to remember things that you could solve. So we solved a lot of problems in the game by making Japanese Navy white and the Japanese Army mustard yellow and the U.S. Navy blue and the U.S. Army green, which we didn't do in the first edition. So there was that change from first edition to second edition, just improving letting the graphics help you play the game, which you learn after the fact. So there's that piece. Then people come up with new strategies, and I would say that for the most part, I don't change the game based on new strategies unless the strategy doesn't have a reply within the game system. And I haven't really had that problem over the years. So I don't change for that. But what I do change from edition to edition is, the way something gets worded. When I get asked like 5 questions about the same thing, I go, I probably didn't word that rule that well. It can be worded better. So we rewrite the rule. We don't change the design. So development of the language changes from edition to edition in the rules. But then there's the other side is I try not to change components too much. In other words, you don't want to change counters or cards or map from edition to edition if you can help it, because then everybody who got it the first edition feels like you cheated them somehow. They can always get the rules online, but if you change the pieces dramatically, other than, like I said, first edition to second edition, sometimes there's a big art change, and I think that's legitimate if there's enough time between them. But yeah, there was like 10 years between first edition and second edition of Empire of the Sun. There was 35 years difference between Pacific War version 1 and version 2. So big time changes, you can do that, but over short periods, you should only be changing the rules so people understand them better. But if the design was correct the first time, I have never had to change the design piece.
Sure. So thank you so much for the talk. I hope that we can meet in person one day. If it's not Spain, the US, who knows? Okay. Thanks, Timo.
Thanks to you, Daniel. And Mark, I think there is last question from Luis. Luis, please come to the stage. To accept, yeah.
It's a very interesting art.
Hi, Luis. You are on mute, Luis.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
And I guess a picture is coming in. I see little.
You cannot. Maybe you're okay. Now we can see you.
Hey, how are you doing? So, Mark, thank you for your many hours of fun that you gave us, and I can tell you, this is fantastic having you here. Just a quick question. Perhaps this is on your book, and I will read it in your book if it is there. But in your design process, could you please tell us a little bit about where do you get your ideas from? Is it inspiration, luck? Is it from other games? Is it throughout test and error? Is it a combination of everything? Where does it come from? I had a friend, he working in advertising, and he won an Cannes in France. And I asked him the same question, and he told me, yes, I get my ideas when I wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning and I the idea, and then because otherwise I will forget. So where is it coming from in the case of Mark? Thank you.
So there's no. I'll give you a primary answer and a secondary answer. The primary answer is I'm always reading, right? And I read all the time. And by the way, I just want to say, Luis, I love your room. I mean, all those books. I mean, wherever you are, the beautiful room. However you put that.
I was very happy having a wife letting me do this,
I have a great wife too, but tell your wife, thank you. Just to see your room, I love it. So you obviously have a lot of books too. So I have a crazy amount of books also, and so I read. And so I'll talk about Churchill. So what I was doing, I was reading a book on the diplomatic history of World War II, the diplomatic history of World War II, and I'm reading about Churchill. And I had already read Churchill's 6-volume World War II thing years and years ago. And whenever I read a book about a topic that I'm interested in, I go to my game collection and find a game to set up so I can see it. It helps me. I don't always play the game, but I sometimes just set it up to see it as I'm reading the book. It helps me visualize it. And when it came to Churchill, there was no game. I had nothing I could find to play. And so often when I'm reading a book, I see an aspect of history that I like to see in a game. And if I don't see a game, or if I have a game, the game doesn't quite look at it the way I want to look at it. So that's the primary way, it's reading books. Then periodically, I get asked by somebody, would you do a game about this? So it's like a commission, like a request from a publisher. And if it interests me, I'll say, okay. And so there's some of my games I would call are literally, like, in other words, I just been playing this Dune game I was saying by those two talented Italian guys. Now, if somebody came to me, I wish somebody would come to me and say, hey, would you do a game on Conan the Barbarian? I would jump, so there are some intellectual properties that I'd love to do a game about, but I'm not going to spend the money to get the property and produce it. So I have to be approached by somebody. So the secondary way is somebody would come to me and ask me, would you do this? And I've done that a number of times in my life. And also from, from down in DC, I periodically do things. So that's the primary way is my reading leads to an interest. I do a game. Secondarily, somebody says, I have this property. I would love to see a game on it. Are you interested in doing the design? And so that's the other way. And when I sleep, I sleep. Whatever I think about when I'm sleeping, when I wake up, I don't remember, so it would be very useful.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. Yeah, I do sleep too.
Thanks, Luis. Thank you very
Cheers.
much. Cheers. Mark, one question that, well, in this community, we have a lot of teachers, okay? And they wanted to ask you one important question. Yep, please.
No, I taught as a professor, an adjunct professor at a university for many years. Yeah, I like teachers.
Yeah. So the question is, what do you think of the use of wargaming in, well, the question was about university, but I would say also college, so schools, etc., for courses, guys, the kids learning, etc. Do you think that it's good that, yeah, please, go.
I think so if you go back to my beginnings in SPI, I was the editor of a educational newsletter that was being written mostly by a guy named Charlie Campion, and it was how to use simulations in the classroom. And I've dealt with various universities and military institutions trying to bring in gaming. And you have, as a teacher, there is a curriculum. That translates into Spanish. I hope. You have. There's a course. We have to teach these materials. There's going to be these tests. There's a process. And most situations, that class doesn't have a lot of flexibility in time. The teacher has so many lecture hours. They have to produce certain things, and so fitting a simulation into a class might be very beneficial, but you have to take something out to put something in. It's like a zero-sum situation. And as a teacher, I recognize that as a problem. So you either have to get the classroom to want to give extra time, like on a Saturday or an evening, to play to get more experience. And that has limited, a lot of students are not as dedicated as others are. And so it's a limited effect. Now, I have taught classes that are specifically about using simulations, and there, of course, the curriculum is the simulation, has no problem. Yes.
Okay.
So I guess the simple answer is the difficulty is the zero-sum aspect of a course, and how do you introduce it so that you add more value than what you're taking out is a very difficult question to ask any educator. But it's that is the crux of the problem, not whether it's a good idea or not.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, I don't know if we have arrived to the end. Okay. I don't know if you have any of them. It has been, honestly, Mark, it has been really, really a pleasure. Believe me, I think that you have done happy a lot of people in this community, Spanish community. Of course, Mark, we wait you in Spain. Please, we will be in contact, okay?
Yeah,
as soon as you start closing.
Yeah, let's definitely talk about the fall, maybe, but certainly next year, 2020, 2026. I'm going to commit that I'm going to get to Spain. I just want to go to Spain.
Thank you also for being in Mesa de Guerra. It has been really a pleasure to interview you, to have this conversation with you. I will be in contact for new chats, new conversations, and why not tutorials, etc. Okay?
Excellent. Take care, Chimo.
Thanks, Mark. Have a nice. Thanks. Cheers. Bye-bye. Thanks.
great day,
Gracias a
everybody.
todos. Un saludo. Bye, bye, bye. Bye.